Every year, approximately 1,500 corpses were abandoned in the streets of Rome. Someone had to remove them by hand, wearing distinctive red clothing that warned others to stay away. That was just one of many professions in ancient Rome that destroyed the lives of those who performed them. Death handlers, sewer divers, mine slaves, and executioners powered the Roman Empire and made civilization possible, but they died doing it. These weren't soldiers or celebrated heroes. These were the forgotten, the condemned, and this was their reality. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy history videos like this, be sure to like the video and subscribe. Thank you. Let's dive in. The Libitinarii were Rome's funeral workers who handled corpses, and Romans feared them because of what they called death pollution. Romans believed that touching a corpse made you tainted, contaminated, and dangerous to be near. Approximately 1,500 abandoned corpses appeared in Rome's streets every year, and these bodies were left to rot until the Libitinarii removed them as government contractors. During plague outbreaks, the numbers exploded dramatically. Cassius Dio claimed that 2,000 people died daily during one outbreak in 189 CE, with 30,000 dead in a single autumn under Nero's reign. The Libitinarii wore distinctive red clothing and red caps to warn people they were polluted, and they rang bells to alert citizens and give them time to leave. However, morbid curiosity often drew crowds who watched corpses being dragged by hooks through streets to burial pits. The social stigma was crushing. The Libitinarii couldn't hold public office, couldn't serve in government, and lost legal protections through infamia, which meant loss of social standing. Wealthy Romans wouldn't marry them or associate with them, so they lived outside city walls near the Grove of Libitina, kept away from decent society. Work restrictions were severe. They could only enter cities at night to fetch bodies and perform executions, because Romans lumped all morbid jobs together. They could only bathe after the first hour of night, and time restrictions governed everything. For an abandoned slave corpse, they had 2 hours to remove it, while a suicide by hanging required removal within 1 hour maximum. Despite the stigma, some Libitinarii grew wealthy because death was profitable, and Romans resented this fact, which made people hate them even more. The Cloaca Maxima was Rome's ancient sewer system, built around 600 BCE as an engineering marvel that was also a death trap. Sewer workers descended into tunnels that were built for drainage rather than human passage, with narrow passages, low ceilings, and constantly flowing waste creating hazardous conditions. Toxic gases filled these spaces, including methane, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon monoxide, which were invisible killers that workers couldn't see until it was too late. Drowning was common during heavy rains, when water levels rose quickly and workers became trapped with no escape. Disease was everywhere in the sewers, with rats, parasites, and contaminated water causing workers to develop infections, respiratory problems, and skin diseases that often killed them young. The workers who performed this labor were mostly slaves and condemned criminals because Romans considered them expendable. Ventilation didn't exist like in modern sewers, and workers relied on small shafts and occasional manholes that never provided enough air. Lighting consisted of oil lamps and torches that were both dangerous because they could ignite gases and cause explosions. The work never ended because sewers constantly clogged with debris, animal carcasses, and human waste. Workers removed blockages by hand with no protective equipment, just bare hands exposed to everything. Centuries later, these workers remained nameless and forgotten with no memorials, just remembered as necessary expendable labor. The Bestiarii were animal handlers who trained wild beasts for arena spectacles, and death came frequently in their profession. Lions, bears, tigers, bulls, and elephants all needed handling, and training happened in close quarters, inside cages where one mistake could be fatal. Arena maintenance workers faced different dangers as they cleaned between events and removed both human and animal bodies from blood-soaked sand under intense time pressure. Beast cages were located underground and connected to the arena, and workers guided animals through tunnels into elevators and up to the arena floor in a process that was dangerous every time. Some workers handled executions known as Damnati ad Bestias, where condemned prisoners were killed by beasts. Death rates for Bestiarii were significant because animals were unpredictable, and training didn't eliminate danger but only reduced it. Pay was better than some jobs because a risk premium existed, but social stigma remained for those who worked with death and violence. Mining was the worst job in ancient Rome without contest. Damnati ad metalla, which meant condemned to the mines, was effectively a death sentence. Life expectancy was only a few months to maybe a year, with some scholars estimating 3 to 4 years maximum, though in the worst mines, workers died much sooner. There were 3 types of workers. Free citizens performed skilled work, slaves provided labor, and criminals were sent to perform death work. Free workers supervised while staying safer, but slaves and criminals died fastest. Working conditions were nightmarish, with narrow shafts measuring only 3 to 6 square feet where workers crawled through dragging ore. Ventilation was terrible, and poisonous gases, including sulfur and alum, accumulated, causing workers to suffocate slowly. Cave collapses were common because Romans lacked adequate support beams, so workers were frequently trapped, crushed, or buried alive. Lighting consisted of oil lamps that indicated shift length, typically 11 hours spent in darkness breathing poison. Children worked in the mines too, crawling through spaces adults couldn't fit through, carrying baskets of ore before dying young. Heat in deep mines was unbearable with no circulation, and dehydration killed many. Food was minimal, just enough to keep them working, and workers received bread, posca, and wine that made them drunk and less aware of suffering. Workers were chained around their necks to prevent escape, and suicide was common. Human bones have been found in slag piles because mine slaves received no burials and were thrown out with waste ore. Specific mines were notorious. Las Medulas in Spain used hydraulic mining that destroyed entire hillsides. Carthago Nova enslaved tens of thousands to produce silver. The Rio Tinto mines employed 20,000 slaves working in toxic conditions. Pliny the Elder documented how mine fumes killed workers instantly, yet Romans continued operations regardless. Fire setting was common, where workers heated rock faces, then doused them with cold liquid to crack the stone, but this created more toxic smoke and increased deaths. The economic importance was massive. Silver was needed for currency, gold for wealth, iron for weapons, and copper for tools. The empire's currency depended on mining because the silver denarius was the economy's backbone. When mining declined, currency became debased and economic crisis followed. Romans knew these jobs killed workers, but didn't care because slaves were expendable, criminals deserved punishment, and free citizens stayed away. The Carnifex was Rome's executioner and torturer, representing the most hated profession in Roman society. Romans needed executioners because the state required death sentences, torture for investigations, and crucifixions for rebels, but they despised those who performed these tasks. Social exile was complete. They lived outside city walls and were forbidden inside except when working, after which they had to immediately depart. Infamia affected them worst of all, because they experienced complete loss of legal standing, worse than slaves. A Carnifex couldn't testify in court, couldn't sue anyone, and had no legal rights. The methods they performed were brutal, and included crucifixion, beating to death, stoning, strangling, beheading, and burning alive. There was also poena culae, reserved for patricide, where the convict was sewn into a sack with a live dog, rooster, viper, and monkey before being thrown into a river. Executioners wore distinctive red clothing that marked them and warned people, causing citizens to avoid them and flee at their sight. Marriage was impossible because no respectable family would allow it, and the children of executioners became executioners themselves because the profession was hereditary. Citizens spat at them and threw things, but still needed them because Rome required someone to carry out death sentences. Pay was decent as compensation for social death, but money couldn't buy respect, and carnifexes died alone and were buried in unmarked graves. Ancient Rome's glory was built on bones, suffering, and expendable lives. Funeral workers handled death pollution, sewer workers drowned in darkness, miners suffocated underground, and executioners lived as outcasts. These jobs powered the empire and made civilization possible, but they cost thousands of lives every year for centuries. Rome's marble temples, roads, aqueducts, and the Colosseum all required human sacrifices on scales we struggle to comprehend. Behind every monument and triumph were people doing terrible jobs, dying terrible deaths, and being forgotten by history until now. If this opened your eyes to Rome's dark side, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that doesn't sugarcoat the truth. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.